They thought a house was just a family asset they could pass around whenever it suited them. But Elena knew the law, the paperwork, and the truth. Years earlier, when her parents were close to foreclosure, she didn't simply rescue them. She secured her legal position. So when they forged documents and tried to transfer the property to her sister, they were not stealing from a helpless daughter. They were attacking the one person who could prove ownership, expose the fake deed, freeze the title, and let the entire fraudulent plan collapse in court.
34, 2 a.m. My phone buzzes. I am working late, nursing wine. Sheriff on the line. He claims my folks, Martha and Arthur, filed a report. They say I cut their power and water at their Tahoe cabin. He is barking about squatter rights. I sip my drink, eyes on the federal warrant waiting on my desk. I smile, voice cold as stone. Fine, officer. Let them sit in the dark. Tomorrow morning, federal prison provides free housing and all the utilities they need. Before I reveal how they tried to scam me and landed in cuffs, tell me where you are watching from. Subscribe if you have dealt with toxic family treating you like a walking ATM. You need to see how this trap snapped shut. To see how my parents end up freezing while the feds move in, go back 2 months. It was my sister Chloe's wedding. At 28, Chloe was a vapid influencer obsessed with her online aesthetic. She was marrying Julian, a smooth talker claiming to be a tech mogul. His crypto schemes were obviously a total fraud. As a wealth management lead, I was just their personal piggy bank. The venue was drowning in lilies and champagne. Near the ice, my mother, Martha, rushed over, frantic. She dragged me into the hall, whispering that my father's card was declined for the catering. They threatened to pull the food. Without blinking, I handed over my card for $25,000. I had been bailing them out for 6 years, so keeping up appearances was routine. I returned to my table, waiting for a thank you that never came. The real show started when my father grabbed the mic. The champagne tower sparkled. Standing by the flowers, I did the math. As a consultant, I know a bad investment. This wedding was a disaster. Chloe held court by the ice, wearing a dress that cost more than car, snapping selfies. Her groom, Julian, stood nearby, laughing way too loud. He told everyone he was a tech CEO. When asked what his company did, he spewed buzzwords about blockchain. I had checked his firm last month. It was a hollow shell registered to a PO box. I checked my watch, desperate to leave. I stayed near the exits, but in my family. Keeping a distance never meant keeping my wallet closed. Martha appeared beside me, makeup smeared, clutching her purse until her knuckles turned white. She hauled me toward the service hall. "Caroline, we have a huge emergency," she hissed. I pulled away, smoothing my dress. "What kind of emergency?" Before she could answer, my father Arthur showed up, followed by a frustrated caterer. Arthur wiped his brow, giving me that fake panic look. "Caroline, thank God. A bank mix-up. My card was flagged for fraud. The account is frozen, and this man needs payment now, or he pulls the dinner." He looked at the caterer. "What is the balance?" 25,000, he said flatly. "The contract requires before service. I have 5 minutes before he cleared the kitchen." I stared at them, completely unimpressed. "You told me this was paid weeks ago." "We thought it was," Martha stammered, voice rising. "There were overages. The flowers, the premium bar Julian wanted. We cannot let them pull the food, Caroline. Julian has family here from Atlanta who flew first class. We will look like peasants if the staff packs up." "It is a temporary hold," Arthur added, patting my shoulder. "You know how banks are. Put it on your card. I will wire the money Monday." I looked at him, knowing exactly what a max limit looks like. There was no fraud. They were broke. They blew money they did not have just to keep up the facade. "I am not paying $25,000 for this," I said firmly. "Figure it out. Tell Chloe to use her wedding money." Martha gasped, grabbing my wrist again. "You cannot do this to your sister. Do you want to humiliate us? If the food stops, everyone will know we are broke." "You are broke," I said coldly. "I am not. Please, Caroline." Arthur pleaded, leaning in. "Do this one thing. We have done so much for you. We are family. If you do not pay, Chloe will be crushed. You make enough to cover temporary charges." They had perfected this routine. The fake crisis, the loyalty trip, the manipulation. I stood there, hearing the band play. I thought about the mortgage payments I had made for 6 years. I thought about the thousands I had funneled into their accounts while they praised Julian's fake business. If I left, the wedding would fall apart. Chloe would throw a fit, and my parents would blame me for years. I did not want the drama. I just wanted the night to end. I opened my purse and pulled out my corporate card. I handed it to the caterer, ignoring them. "Run it," I said, voice dead. He swiped the card, a beep, payment approved. "We start dinner now," he said, turning away. Martha let out a huge sigh. "Thank heavens, you are a lifesaver." Arthur straightened his tie, shifting from desperate to arrogant. "See? Minor speed bump. I will get that back to you next week. Do not worry." I took the card back, knowing I would never see a cent of that $25,000. I said nothing. I just looked at them, accepting this as an extortion fee for my silence. "Come on," Martha whispered, latching onto my father. "We need to reach the table before speeches start." They hurried toward the ballroom, leaving me behind. I took a breath, smoothing my dress. The ransom was paid. Crisis averted. I figured I would just endure the dinner, listen to the speeches, then head home for a quiet night. I walked inside and sat at a table far from the stage. The lights dimmed and the band started playing. I watched my father march to the stage, grab the mic. He tapped it twice, flashing that trademark grin. I sipped my water, bracing for a generic toast. I had no idea the real betrayal was about to drop. The room went dead silent. He stood under the lights, radiating the fake humility he had perfected over decades. He hoisted his glass, commanding the room. "Family is not just a word to us," he began, voice booming through the speakers. "It is an action, a lifelong commitment. When we look at Chloe and Julian today, we see the future. Two brilliant people ready to conquer the world." I took a slow sip of water. My heart rate stayed steady, but my mind started tallying the lies. "Julian, my boy," he continued, turning to the table, "you are a genius, a tech founder who will change finance forever." We could not be prouder. Julian stood up, hand on his heart, giving a modest bow that looked entirely rehearsed. The crowd murmured in adoration. "Starting life needs a solid foundation," my father said, tone growing grandiose. "We know how brutal the housing market is for young couples today. The economy is harsh. Economy is harsh. A parent's duty is to help their children start on solid ground." He paused for effect. I watched my mother dab her eye with a tissue, careful not to ruin her makeup. "For 30 years, our suburban home has been our sanctuary," he announced, voice thick with fake emotion. "It is where Chloe took her first steps, where we celebrate everything. But a house is just bricks until a family fills it with love. We decided it is time for a new generation to make memories there." The ballroom grew perfectly still. Everyone leaned in, waiting for the big moment. "Chloe and Julian," he smiled, projecting to the back. "As your wedding gift, we are signing over the deed to the family home, fully paid off. An $800,000 estate to start your new life without a single financial worry." For a second, the room was so quiet I heard the air conditioning hum. Then absolute chaos erupted. The crowd went wild, standing ovation, cheering, whistling, and my relatives jumping for joy. On stage, the performance hit a fever pitch. Chloe burst into tears, throwing her arms around my father. Julian rushed in, pulling my mother into a perfectly staged, emotional embrace. I sat frozen at table 42, my ice water sweating onto my fingertips. My brain, trained for years of financial analysis, suddenly short-circuited. A fully paid-off house. The words bounced around my skull like punches. My parents were broke. 6 years ago, Arthur gambled away their savings. 60 days from foreclosure, 60 days from foreclosure, Martha begged me for a bailout. As a wealth management consultant, I knew it was a disaster. But they were my parents. I stepped in. For 6 years, I wired $3,500 every month to their lender. I paid the taxes and the emergency repairs. I sacrificed my own investments to keep a roof over their heads. I personally poured over $250,000 in that place to stop an auction. Yet, 20 minutes ago, my mother grabbed my arm, panicking because they could not afford the catering bill. Now, they were taking credit for gifting an $800,000 estate they did not even own. An estate kept afloat only by my monthly payments. They were handing my life's work to arrogant grifter as a wedding gift. I watched the guests tear up at this fake display of love. Julian looked like he had won the lottery. I slowly set my glass down. The cheering died down as guests returned to their seats. I stared at the head table. Martha was beaming. Then her eyes locked onto me. The smile vanished. She knew exactly what I was calculating. She quickly looked away and turned her back, forcing a conversation with Julian. The betrayal hit with a cold, absolute clarity. They used me as a silent ATM just by the admiration of strangers and impress a golden child who never worked a day in her life. I grabbed my clutch and stood. The main course was coming, but my appetite was gone. I walked out, heels clicking on the marble. No scene. I would wait in the bridal suite. It smelled of hairspray and lilies. He sat in a high-backed chair, waiting. The bass shook the ballroom floor. 11:45. Speeches done, cake cut. Any minute, the couple would make their escape. The door swung wide. Laughter echoed in. Sarah walked in first, struggling with that heavy gown. Mark followed, bottle in hand. My folks trailed riding high. Sarah whined about her feet, then bragged about her wedding gift. The perfect moment. Brenda beamed at her husband. Your father gave it beautifully, she whispered. You two are set for life. I cleared my throat. Sudden silence. Forehead snapped toward me. The laughter vanished. Thomas winced and breast stiff, and Brenda's smile turned into thin white line. Sarah rolled her eyes. Mark looked annoyed. Thomas dropped the act. Caroline, what are you doing here? Go mingle. I stood up, clutch in hand. I am not staying for your exit. I came clear a few things about your gift. Brenda stepped between us. Don't bring drama to your sister's suite. It is her big night. I am thrilled for her, I lied. I am just curious about the math. You told 300 people you were gifting an $800,000 estate, debt-free. Mark stepped in, chugging champagne. It is about building a foundation. You work in finance, you get leverage. We are using that equity to scale my new platform. A power move for the family. He sounded like a walking podcast of buzzwords. Real wealth requires actual assets, I said. I looked at my father. You do not own that house, Thomas. You haven't owned it in 6 years. Keep it down. He hissed, glancing around. Let them hear, I replied. I want Sarah and Mark to know exactly what they are inheriting. They are getting a massive mortgage, one I have been paying. Sarah sighed. Why do you always make this about you? Can't you just a house? Mom and Dad gave us the house. Jealousy for us. Jealousy is ugly, jealous? The word tasted like ash. Sarah, I have wired $3,500 every month for 6 years. I pay taxes and repairs. I saved our parent from foreclosure while they bought you luxury handbags. You are wearing a dress that costs a year's salary. And you call me jealous? Brenda glared. You make a fortune, Caroline. Helping family is what you do. You do not want support, I said. You want a sponsor. You even made me cover $25,000 in catering because you blew your cash on appearances. We will pay you back, Thomas barked, face flushing. Cash flow issue. I am not talking about the food, I said coldly. I am talking about the house. I am done. I am canceling the mortgage auto, draft, the property taxes, and every credit card you have been using. If Mark is such a tech genius, he can cover the monthly payment. Welcome to home ownership, Sarah. She stared at me, then at Mark in panic. Mark lowered his glass. Wait, what mortgage? Thomas said the house was paid off. He promised $800,000 equity. He lied to you, I said. I turned to leave. I had drawn my line. But Brenda let out a mocking laugh that bounced off the mirrors. Cancel the payments, she sneered. Go ahead, Caroline. Cut us off. We do not care. I paused at the door and looked back. You do not care? The bank will foreclose in 90 days if the payments stop. You will be on the street. No, we will not, Brenda smiled. It was the look of a predator. We do not need your money. You think you are smart with your spreadsheets, but you do not control us. Thomas looked smug. Your mother is right. Stop paying. It is not our problem anymore. What are you talking about? I demanded. Brenda leaned in, voice dripping with triumph. I'm with the county clerk. I finished the deed transfer last week. Sarah is the sole legal owner now. We gave it to her free and clear. My mind raced. That is legally impossible with an active mortgage. I kept my voice steady. The bank will demand the full balance immediately. Oh, please, Mark scoffed. You are trying to scare us. Lawyers handle transfers all the time. The bank does not care as long as someone pays. And some will keep paying, Brenda said. Stern will keep paying, Brenda said, staring into my eyes. Because if it goes in foreclosure, it destroys the credit of whoever is on the loan. My mother's audacity hit me like a train. She transferred the house to Sarah but left the debt in my parents' names, assuming I would keep paying to protect them. They stole the asset and left me with the liability, hoping I would not let them go bankrupt. Sarah smirked, adjusting her tiara. Thanks for the house, Caroline. We'll invite you over for pool parties. I looked at the four of them, the coward, the brat, the leech, and the master manipulator. I could have screamed, but I did not. I am a consultant. I handle hostile takeovers and corporate warfare. When your enemy makes a catastrophic mistake, you do not warn them. You let them dig their own grave. Brenda thought she was a genius for filing that deed. But she had no idea what kind of legal trap she just walked into. She did not know what I knew about the specific details of that property title. The silence in the room was heavy. They were waiting for me to explode. Instead, he smoothed my dress and looked my mother with the cold detachment of a mortician. "Enjoy the house, Sarah," I said. My voice was calm and final. I turned the brass knob, opened the door, and stepped out. "Caroline." "Wait," Thomas called out, his voice wavering. I did not stop. I did not look back. I left the estate, the night air biting cold. I handed my ticket to the valet and climbed into my car. As I drove back toward Chicago, I pulled out my phone and went through my contacts. One by one, I blocked them all: my sister, my parents, even the relatives who enabled their greed. They wanted to commit fraud to fuel their delusions? Fine. They had no idea I was about to let them legally implode. 2 months of total silence followed, no frantic texts about bank balances. I had finally cut the financial umbilical cord that had drained me for 6 years. I severed all financial ties and blocked my family across every platform. Life in Chicago hit peak efficiency. I closed a major merger and enjoyed the quiet of my penthouse, watching my wealth grow without their constant fake emergencies. But I knew the peace would not last. The drama finally hit on a rainy Tuesday. My office line buzzed, a line almost no one had. I expected a client but heard my mother's trembling voice instead. "Caroline, please, do not hang up," she begged. "We are in a total nightmare." I leaned back in my chair, staying deathly silent. Brenda sobbed that they were stuck in a motel parking lot. Their credit cards declined. "You have to help us," she pleaded. I kept my voice icy. "What happened to that $800,000 estate, Brenda?" I thought that was for the golden couple and their generational wealth. A bitter sob broke out. "Stephanie and Donovan kicked us out," she confessed. "They changed the locks. How do you get evicted from a house you just gave away?" Then Thomas grabbed the phone, his voice thick with panic. "Caroline, this is no joke. Donovan manipulated your sister. He claimed he needed the house for his crypto surf farm. They threw our clothes in garbage bags and dumped us on the porch." "Sounds like a brilliant business move by Donovan," I replied. "It is exactly what you taught Stephanie to do." "This is your fault," Thomas snapped. "If you had kept paying the mortgage, they would not be so stressed." I stopped, spin my pen. "The mortgage is in your name, Thomas. You handed them the deed but kept the debt. You built your own cage." "We made a mistake," Brenda cried. "We were foolish. We thought we were securing Stephanie's future. But they treat us like trash." "We need your Lake Tahoe house," Thomas demanded, ignoring her. I paused, making sure I heard him correctly. "You want my vacation home." "It is empty," Thomas insisted. "You owe us, Caroline. We are your parents. You cannot put us on the street." I glanced at the photo of my Tahoe cabin, a glass-walled sanctuary. The thought of them polluting it was sickening. "Listen clearly," I said, my voice turning to ice. "You treated me like a bank for 6 years, shamed me at my own wedding and handed my sacrifice to your favorite child. Now you want my vacation home? Family is in action, Brenda. I am not your safety net anymore." "I will call your firm," Thomas threatened. "I will tell them how you abuse your parents. I will make a scene." I smiled, knowing my line was recording every word. "You can try, Thomas, but the answer is no. You will not get a cent. You made your bed with Donovan and Stephanie. Sleep in the parking lot." I hung up. They were broke, homeless, and betrayed by the very people they had sacrificed everything to please. Classic karma. But looking at the Chicago skyline, I knew my father's pride would never accept defeat. I knew they would try to force their way into the Tahoe house. I was ready. The notification hit 3 days later. A Friday night. My screen flashed. Motion detected at Lake Tahoe front entry. My heart rate stayed steady. I opened my security app. A beat-up rental Ascend sat in the driveway of my cabin, a fortress I bought with my own hard-earned money. Thomas and Brenda stepped out, dragging garbage bags, closed coat. Thomas walked to the oak door and pulled a brass key from his coat. I had forgotten to change that old deadbolt. The door swung open. My security system started its 30-second countdown to the siren. I scanned the front door feed. Arthur didn't hesitate. He grabbed a heavy pipe wrench and shattered the keypad. Plastic shards flew everywhere. He ripped the wires, killing the alarm. A cold, calculated break-in. Clara followed, dragging trash bags across my custom rugs. She scanned the room with pure, entitled greed. She dumped the bags on my white leather couch and marched to the kitchen. I watched my mother raid my wine rack, grabbing a vintage red I saved for my promotion. They toasted to their own cleverness, certain they had won. They knew the law once inside. The leverage shifted. They were betting on squatters' rights. In their minds, I was still the pushover daughter paying their bills to keep the peace. They assumed family guilt would stop me. They had no idea that version of me was dead. Recorded the break. In their smug toast, I backed everything up to a secure server. They wanted a high-stakes property war. I grabbed my phone and called my lawyer, Mitchell. This wasn't going to end the way they planned. I called the sheriff to report a home invasion. I kept it clinical, no mention they were my parents. Just intruders. 20 minutes later, patrol lights hit the snow. My father, Richard, opened the door with the practiced calm of a suburban patriarch, ready to play the victim. Richard gave an Oscar-worthy performance, blaming a glitchy cat for the damage. The deputy stepped inside skeptical. Richard played his ace, a folder of fake papers. He claimed they were tenants with a verbal lease. I watched from my screen, knowing exactly what those pathetic forgeries were worth. Total fraud. He used old phone bills as proof of rent. It sounded convincing at 2 a.m. The deputy called me. I told him they broke in and smashed my security gear. I wanted them cuffed. The officer toughed. The officer just sighed, saying they established presence and his hands were tied. He called it a civil matter. No arrest, no eviction tonight. My stomach dropped. They were staying, and I was looking at months of legal hell. The officers left, leaving my parents in charge. I stared at the feed, watching them celebrate a win that would not last the week. Richard locked the deadbolt and turned to the camera. He knew I was watching. He raised his wine glass in a mocking toast, mouthing a thank you. He thought he outsmarted me with his fake lease and charm. He had no idea what was coming. That smirk didn't anger me, it focused me. I didn't cry. I called Grant, my litigation attorney. He laughed at the trap they had set. Local tenant laws are tough, but they are not bulletproof. We didn't need an eviction. We needed a biohazard emergency. I transferred the house in a private holding company. The game had changed. Grant had a contact in the environmental business. They declared the home a biohazard due to toxic mold in the vents. Under state law, a quarantine meant all utilities had to be cut immediately. It bypassed tenant rights entirely. By Tuesday, the trap was set. The power and water were killed. The temperature outside plummeted. I watched from my office as the lights died and the heat vanished. Arthur was frantic, flicking switches and screaming at the utility company. Panic set in when they told him house under a mandatory health quarantine. He was trapped in the cold. The police returned, but this time they told my father to leave. Staying in a biohazard zone was a crime. His fake lease was suddenly worthless. I watched on my screen as they scrambled to pack trash bags in the freezing dark. They tried to steal my home. I just froze them out. They stumbled down the icy porch, tossing bags into a beat-up rental. I watched them pull away, vanishing in the night, broke and finish. I sipped my wine and prepped the next move. The day after that blizzard, I walked into Elias's office. That rental car was only the start. My parents were ruined, but my real problem remained. My sister and her husband were still living in the $1 million mansion I saved from foreclosure. Hosting parties, playing the success story, living a lie. Time to wreck their reality. He sat across from Elias at his glass table. The city view was great, but I was focused on the files between us. Elias looked sharp, waiting for my cue. He knew the drill. I didn't want my sister and her husband evicted. I wanted the asset liquidated. Sell it, take my share, and leave them with nothing. Elias opened a folder, pushing his glasses up. He looked at me, calculating. Caroline, if we are forcing a partition sale, we need to prove your standing. Paying their mortgage for 6 years doesn't automatically make you an owner. I leaned back, smiling. My parents thought I was just the dutiful daughter paying their debts out of guilt. They were wrong. I am a wealth manager. I do not pour $300,000 into sinking ship without taking the wheel. I tapped the thickets file. Open the records from 6 years ago. Checked the date the bank was 60 days from foreclosure. Elias scanned the fine print, finding the contract with the county seal. A slow grin spread across his face. 6 years ago, when my parents begged for a bailout, I gave them an ultimatum. I covered the past, due balance, the payments, the taxes, and repairs. But I demanded equity. I forced them to sign a deed adding my name to the title as a co-owner. No fine print. I sat them with a lawyer and forced them to sign in blue ink, desperate to hide their bankruptcy. They signed away half their equity for my cash. Elias dropped the deed on the glass. You own 50% of this estate, Caroline. This is not a gentleman's agreement. It is cold, registered law. Correct, I said, my voice steady. My parents never owned that house alone, only half. The rest is mine. That is why their housewarming party was a joke. Richard stood there, showing off a home that was mortgaged and co-owned by the woman sitting in the back. Elias tapped his pen, eyes tracking the county database on his laptop. If you hold 50%, we have a major problem. Elias's tone turned urgent. He spun the laptop toward me. I scanned the files. The history showed a quitclaim deed. It claimed the house was transferred entirely from my parents to my sister and Richard. They were now the sole owners of $1 million estate. Legally impossible, I said, a rush of adrenaline hitting me. A quitclaim deed only moves the interest the grantor actually holds. They could transfer their half, but my 50%? That requires my notarized signature. He never signed it. Elias nodded, his face hardening. He downloaded the filing from the county clerk. We watched the document load. We both leaned in. There was my father's messy sprawl, my mother's script, and my own signature. It was black ink, bold and precise, a perfect imitation of my style. I stared, cold realization setting in. I had never touched that document. I never authorized giving my sister and her scammer husband $250,000 in equity. The room went silent as I looked at Elias. The game had shifted. It was no longer a family squabble. It was a criminal conspiracy. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I sat back, my mind racing through the fallout. My previous wins were nothing compared to the storm I was about to unleash. Elias's screen lit the dark wood of the table. I leaned in again. My eyes traced the letters of my name. Terrifyingly accurate, but a fake. I pointed to a stroke. I never dragged the ink down, I flick it up. This is a forgery. Elias didn't blink, just zoomed in. Forging a birthday card is a feud. Forging a deed to steal real estate? That is a massive escalation. My parents hadn't just lied to me. They committed a premeditated crime. They sat there, looked at a small fortune, and signed my name to steal my equity. They handed my blood and sweat to my sister just to play house. Elias adjusted his glasses. A signature alone is not enough. He warned. Law requires strict authentication. Someone had to verify you signed it freely. He scrolled to the corner. A circular brack stamp, a notary public. Elias read the name and pulled up the licensing database. Within 2 minutes, we had a hit. The notary ran a shop in a rundown strip mall, handling bail bonds. He was the exact kind of guy my father could bribe with an envelope of cash. My father was a salesman. He knew how to talk to desperate people. Maybe he flashed some hundreds and spun a lie about a busy daughter. Either way, he verified a ghost. I looked at Elias. What does this mean for a prosecution? I needed to hear the weight of the law. I wanted to measure the destruction heading their way. Elias folded his hands. We are looking at a federal indictment, Caroline. This is title fraud. By filing a forged deed, they could commit perjury and record fraud. By moving an asset worth nearly $1 million, they triggered wire fraud. The notary will lose his license and face prison. But your parents? He paused. They are looking at conspiracy and grand theft. High-level felonies. They are looking at 5 to 10 years in federal prison. I let that sink in. My parents chose felonies so their golden child could live in luxury. They risked prison just to spite me. The betrayal cut the last thread of duty. They were not my parents anymore. They were just thieves. I felt a surge of freedom. The gloves were off. We need to contact the county office, Elias said, reaching for his phone. We will file for forgery and tip off the feds. Stop, I said. Not yet. No police. Elias stared confused. That is a felony. Toll your land. That I know. That is exactly why we wait. I stared at the skyline, picturing Mark playing the brilliant tech mogul. He is a fraud, and my sister is addicted to a lifestyle she can't afford. They own that estate. Think they own that state. What does a scammer do a run-out asset? He leverages it. I lie at the phone. You think he will take a loan out against it? I guarantee it. He needs quick cash. He will walk into a bank, show that forged deed, and use my home as collateral. He will try to drain every cent of equity. And then? Elias asked with a dark grin. He commits bank fraud, I said. A federal crime. If we move now, my parents face charges, but my sister and her husband will just play the victim and walk free. But if Mark signs for a $500,000 loan with that fake deed, he becomes a federal criminal. Flag the title a silent tripwire. The moment a bank underwriter touches that loan, the system alerts us. We catch them cold. We were letting their greed build their own gallows. I told Elias to stay ready. I stepped out in the biting wind, which matched the chill in my veins. I climbed in my car, heading to my penthouse. No tears left. The weight of parental betrayal was finally gone. My mind began a cold audit of the last 6 years. The manipulation was a masterpiece. They signed that deed giving me half the equity, and they're so grateful. And they were so grateful. Now the math makes sense. They never saw my signature as a binding contract. To them, my name was just a temporary hurdle, a cheap price for a lifeline bank account. I thought about Sarah. She was always the golden child, the one with the charm they craved. I was the analytical one. My success was a slap in the face to their failures. They hated my wealth but felt entitled to drain it. They saw my income as a family fund to be pillaged for Sarah. Then came Jackson. When Sarah brought him home in rented suits, pitching his hollow crypto startup, my parents were hooked. Jackson had zero capital. He needed the appearance of massive wealth to peddle his fraud. My parents knew their accounts would never impress the son, so they plotted to steal the ultimate prop. The forgery killed my last shred of empathy. This was a cold conspiracy. They found a crooked notary sat at a table and carefully mimicked my signature. They practiced robbing me. They committed a felony, banking on my loyalty to keep me silent. They weaponized my love. I became the beast of burden, funding my own heist for 6 years. Every payment was just me maintaining the credit score they needed for this theft. Sitting in my car, everything shifted. The obligation to love my parents burned away, leaving a cold void. Brenda and Thomas were no longer my parents. They were hostile liabilities. Sarah and Jackson were not family. They were squatters holding stolen goods. I am an asset manager who dismantles toxic structures. I destroy parasites for a living. Time to bring that expertise home. No more begging for apologies. Explanations are for people who want to fix things. I only cared about recovery and destruction. They chose to play a high-stakes game of property fraud. I would let them walk into the casino, put all their chips on the table, then lock the doors and burn the place down. I felt lighter and far more dangerous. The plan was locked. I would watch them bask in stolen glory and wait for Jackson to spring the trap. A thief never stops at one crime. He would reach for more. I returned to Miller's office at 8 sharp. The Chicago skyline was gray, but the lights in the conference room were blinding. Miller had the paperwork ready, a formal complaint detailing the forgery and the corrupt notary. He held his phone ready to call the fraud unit. Caroline, warrants could be issued by tomorrow. He promised. Thomas and Brenda would be arrested. I pushed the papers back, my voice cold, shredded. No police, no lawyers. Miller stared, eyes wide. He adjusted his glasses, looking from the fly to my face. Caroline, they stole $250,000, he stammered. We have to report this. I shook my head. They will not sell. Selling takes work. Sarah is too busy filming house tours, and Donovan is playing the wealthy startup founder. They are blinded by their own fake success. But that lifestyle is expensive to fake. Think about Donovan. He is a pathetic scammer pushing a fake crypto scheme, is desperate for cash, and now he thinks he owns an $800,000 property free and clear. Miller's eyes narrowed. A con artist with a free asset? He will not just sit on it. He will leverage it. He is going to walk in a bank, present that forged deed, and beg for a massive loan. He wants hundreds of thousands for his phantom company and luxury cars. If we arrest my parents now, they take the fall. Sarah plays the victim, and Donovan walks away clean. I do not want them to walk. I want Donovan to sign his name on a federal loan application. Miller leaned back, reeling the play. If Donovan used a forged deed for a bank loan, he commits federal fraud. He triggers an FBI investigation. Exactly, I said. But we need a safety net. File a quiet cloud on title. A discreet red flag buried in the county registry. It would be invisible to anyone checking standard records. Sarah could keep posting, and Donovan could play the CEO, never knowing the landmine was waiting. But the moment he sat down with a bank underwriter, they would run a deep title search. The system would trigger our dispute. The bank would instantly flag the collateral as fraudulent. Miller picked up his gold pen, a sharp smile forming. You want to wait for him to trigger a federal transaction. The moment the bank flags it, we hand our evidence to the feds. I nodded. Let them think they won. We stay silent and wait for the prey to walk in the trap. I went home, poured coffee, and checked an anonymous account. Sarah was posting from the kitchen, planning renovations. Donovan was in the living room, loudly pitching his fake crypto project. They looked so happy, so invincible. They had no idea they were dancing on a legal graveyard. I closed the laptop. Just wait. The trap was armed, and Donovan S. Greed would do the rest. 3 weeks passed. The wedding euphoria faded, replaced by the reality of maintaining a massive estate. Maintenance and appearances were draining their cash. More importantly, Donovan was running out of time. A fake tech CEO cannot survive without fresh capital. I watched their life through my screen while sipping espresso. Sarah was bragging to followers about being debt-free. She filmed Donovan at my old desk, wearing a turtleneck, shouting into his phone about blockchain. It was a perfect performance. But behind the lens, the desperation was leaking through. Donovan had no funding. His startup was just a landing page. He needed cash to fuel his lie. To keep his fake billionaire persona alive, he needed a new luxury SUV and a massive infusion of cash. I knew his type. I had taken down dozens of fakes just like him. When a con artist gets cornered, they do not back down. They double down. Donovan held what he thought was his trump card, $800,000 in home equity. I listened to Sarah's live stream. He was a master manipulator. He never told her they were broke. Instead, he framed his cash grab as a brilliant business move. I heard him pacing, feeding her buzzwords he found online. He told her that keeping money in a house was dead equity. He convinced her that wealthy people leverage assets. He pitched a home equity loan as a power move to multiply their wealth tenfold. He pitched a $90,000 SUV as a business expense. Sarah bought it. She had zero financial sense, always protected from reality by our parents and my mortgage payments. She did not grasp interest rates or the danger of leveraging a home for a fake startup. She just saw $500,000 in cash and a luxury car. Her social media soon filled with pure delusion. She bragged about venture capital deals and disrupted fintech. She was addicted to being a power wife. Fueled by Donovan's greed, they skipped local banks, wanting the prestige of a major downtown institution. I caught her video. She was sitting in their car, a folder, but sticker promoting, giggling about her in a navy suit. Donovan was beside her in navy, flashing an arrogant grin. He really thought he had outsmarted when stealing my house. A secretary me in one go. They heading at the bank with paper, expecting a pagan. A forged papers, expecting a payday. They had no idea a federal tripwire was waiting the second they hand over those documents. The trap was set. He handed me a drink. We sat, watching the skyline. His screen tracked real estate registries in real time. We weren't guessing, we were watching the gears turn. The estate file updated. A bank had started underwriting a $500,000 line of credit. Julian actually did it. He used a fake deed to claim equity he didn't own. My phone buzzed. Chloe was broadcasting their genius online. She uploaded a clip from a car showroom, running her hands over leather and flashing diamond rings. She bragged that marrying a tech genius means never having to wait. She stared at the camera, dripping with condescension. I don't get the cubicle life, she said, working 80 hours for a paycheck. Sad. Limited. No vision. You need to be smart, you need to leverage assets, not earn a wage. She was mocking me, mocking the very career that paid for her home for years. I sipped my coffee, staying calm. Mark shook his head while she showed off the car. The arrogance is staggering, he muttered. They are documenting their own crimes, leaving a perfect paper trail. Let her talk, I said, setting my phone down. Every video builds a timeline. It proves they are active participants in fraud. They can't claim ignorance now. I scanned the monitor. The application was moving fast. Federal underwriting is brutal. Banks don't hand over $500,000 because a guy in a suit uses buzzwords. They verify everything. They accepted the initial request. Now came the automated valuation. A green light flashed. It was confirmed. Julian must have faked revenue projections. The bank bought his fraudulent income statements. They accepted the history I paid for, now linked to his name. Initial review complete, Mark noted. It moved to the title department for a deep background search. I watched the bar fill up. They were digging into records and liens. Chloe uploaded another story from the kitchen. She was unboxing Crystal, announcing a housewarming for their new platform launch. Celebrating our home, she chirped. Big things were coming, just not the kind she expected. I set my mug down. The trap held. When a federal bank issues a loan, title examiners don't just glance at papers. They pull the entire file, checking every signature. Mark and I watch in silence. The banking software was a cold, emotionless machine. It didn't care about her aesthetic or his persona. It only cared about risk. And that house was a massive red flag. The legal cloud I buried in the registry sat waiting. Bank examiners were already pulling files. It was only a matter of time before their automated system hit my hidden tripwire. I smiled. I sat in the law office with tea. Mark monitored the registry while I watched Chloe's feed. They were at a downtown bank surrounded by legal papers. She posted a photo bragging about securing the bag and living the affectorate and living the executive wife life. I zoomed in on her high-resolution shot. I could clearly see Julian signing the lending agreement. He was binding him to a $500,000 equity loan. He was using property he didn't own to swindle a bank. He is signing the final disclosures, I said. Mark leaned in. Before the cash hits his account, the system runs one final check. They have to catch any hidden disputes from the last month. We watched the screen. The tension was electric, like watching a predator step on a landmine. 10 minutes passed. Chloe posted a video of Julian shaking hands with an executive. They thought they won. Then, the monitor flashed red. A harsh warning code filled the screen. The algorithm hit my wall. It bypassed the records my parents faked and collided with the title dispute I buried. There it is, Mark whispered. The bank's fraud unit was getting alerts, but I wasn't leaving this to corporate investigators. I wanted the full weight of the federal government. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a thick, organized dossier. I had spent weeks compiling evidence. It had my original deed, the forged one my father used, mortgage payments and videos where Julian admitted he was stealing the property to fund his startup. Now, the bank's rejection was the final piece. We had proof of attempted bank fraud. I slid the file to my attorney. Send it, I ordered. He worked with an agent focused on financial crime. Mark attached the digital rejection code to our criminal complaint. He typed a technical email detailing the interconnected crimes. He outlined the fraud conspiracy led by my parents, the identity theft from the forged signature, and the attempted wire fraud. He detailed the bank fraud committed when Julian signed that loan application using a stolen house as collateral. Mark clicked send. The email flew through encrypted servers, straight to the feds. I stood by the window looking at the city. The trap snapped shut. Once federal agents open a case, it leaves the victim's hands. The Department of Justice takes over. My parents couldn't beg me to stop because I was just a witness providing facts. Julian wanted to be a tech mogul. My parents wanted to be the elite. Chloe wanted to be an untouchable influencer. They built a world of lies on my stolen equity. Now, the government was about to arrest the cast. The agent just confirmed receipt, Mark said, breaking the silence. They are reviewing the file. He expects federal warrants within 48 hours. They invited everyone. The country club crowd, business contacts, influencer friends. A celebration of stolen wealth. He watched my flexion and felt a chilling peace. It would be the most memorable party our family ever held. I couldn't wait to watch their empire burn. Friday was bitter, but inside the luxury boutique, the atmosphere was arrogant. I sat in my penthouse monitoring logs while watching Chloe broadcast her shopping spree. They were convinced $500,000 was hitting their account. Julian planned a victory lap. He and Chloe stood in an exclusive watch boutique. Julian stood tall in a tailored suit, wearing the smug grin of a man who thought he won. They were maxing out cards, gambling on a massive bank transfer that hadn't landed yet. The classic rookie mistake, spending the loot before the ink is dry. Back in my office, my phone pinged. A text from Mark. 2 sentences. The wire is moving. Federal hold initiated. The $500,000 payment left the reserve. For a second, the cash hit Julian S. account. Then, the federal freeze slammed down. The feds locked every cent. Every linked account went dead. The money was evidence now. I pulled up the other feed. Stephanie was bragging on camera, showing off a rose gold watch Julian had bought a piece costing more than most earn in 2 years. Then, the stream cut. I knew what was coming. I had watched this play out a dozen times. Julian would confident hand his card to the manager. The manager would swipe it, laughing, and then the terminal would beep. A sharp, ugly rejection. I could see Julian's face tightening as he blamed a bank glitch. He would try a backup card. Another beep, declined. Contact your bank. The shop's polite vibe vanished, replaced by a suffocating silence. Clerks shared worried looks. Stephanie's smile crumbled, her face burning with shame. Julian's ego was tied to his wallet. Getting rejected in front of his wife and staff felt like a gut punch. He pulled out his phone, fingers shaking, trying to prove he had cash. When the app loaded, there was no balance. Just a generic error telling him to contact fraud support. I sat in my quiet living room, savoring the justice. Julian stood in that store with a watch he couldn't afford, realizing his financial house of cards had crashed. Federal rules stop bank staff from tipping off suspects during investigations. Operators just read a script, claiming the account is under review. Panic set in. He had caterers to pay by morning, a luxury car dealer expecting a wire by noon. He had a sprawling estate to keep up, and couldn't even afford a tank of gas. The walls of his scam were closing in. He likely called my parents, desperate to know if there was a problem with the deed. Thomas and Brenda would assure him everything was fine, totally clueless that their forged signatures had triggered a federal trap. They sat in their bubble of denial, blind to the federal agent closing in. They had no clue the guest list had ballooned. Influencers weren't the only ones showing up. I snapped my laptop shut, feeling surprisingly calm. I had a dress to pick out. This party was about to get legendary. A biting frost hit the Chicago suburbs that Saturday, but the estate was glowing. Valets crisp vests sprinted around, parking a sea of luxury cars. I watched from the shadows of my hired town car. Sarah and Michael had blown a fortune on this gala. A string quartet played, notes drifting out every time the heavy doors swung wide. My parents were eaten up. Through the windows, I saw Robert laughing with board members, drink in hand. Brenda floated through the crowd wearing a sequin gown and showing off the place like she built it. Sarah held court by the stairs, Liv streaming to her fans. David, though, looked like he was standing on a trapdoor. He kept checking his phone, pacing by the kitchen with a tight, nervous smile. His accounts were frozen, and he was clearly losing his mind. He was surrounded by luxury he couldn't afford, praying for a miracle. He wasn't getting one. He was getting me. I checked my watch. Right on time. 4 unmarked black SUVs pulled on the street, moving with predator speed. They blew past the valet and parked right on the lawn. Doors flew open. I stepped out, cold wind whipping my coat. I didn't come alone. Behind me stood the county sheriff and 6 federal agents in tactical gear with FBI on their backs. We marched up the stone steps, no knocking. I shoved the double doors wide. The shift from the freezing night to the crowded foyer was jarring. The quartet was right by the door. As the agent stormed in, the cellist faltered. The music died in a harsh, discordant crash. Silence hit the room like a shockwave. 100 guests froze, staring. Sarah saw me first. Her eyes flared with pure rage. She handed her phone to a bridesmaid and marched over. Silk gown swishing angrily. "Caroline, what are you doing here?" Sarah demanded, her voice slicing through the silence. "You are not invited. Get out before I call security." I didn't say a word. I didn't even look at her. I just stepped aside to clear the path. The lead FBI agent stepped forward, his badge clipped to his belt. His face was like stone. He looked past Sarah, ignoring her outburst, and locked eyes on the 2 older figures frozen by the fireplace. Robert and Brenda. My father dropped his glass. It shattered, spilling amber liquid across the floor. Mom gasped, clutching her chest. They recognized the jackets. They recognized the federal agents walking right toward them. The lead officer boomed, his voice echoing with cold authority. "Step away from the crowd and keep your hands where I can see them." Guests scrambled back, parting like the Red Sea to dodge the disaster. Whispers rippled through the room as agents formed a tactical circle around my parents. Officer, what is the meaning of this? Dad tried to sound arrogant, but his voice cracked. This is a private home. You cannot just barge in here. You are under arrest by order of the Department of Justice, the agent stated, pulling heavy steel cuffs from his belt. The metallic click echoed in the silent room. You are charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and aggravated identity theft. Mom started hyperventilating, her knees buckling. She reached for Dad, but an agent grabbed her wrist, pinning her arms behind her back. This is a mistake! Mom shrieked, her country club persona shattering. We didn't steal anything. It is our house. We gave it to our daughter. Caroline, tell them. Tell them it is a misunderstanding. I stood still, hands in my pockets, staring her down. I let the coldness in my eyes freeze her breath. You bribed a corrupt notary to forge my signature on a deed, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. You transferred the house to your name and committed a federal felony. The notary confessed to the FBI an hour ago. He handed over footage of you paying him cash. The crowd gasped. The wealthy socialites who had just been praising Mom were now staring in pure disgust. Michael pushed through, his face pale and dripping with sweat. Wait, he stammered, holding his hands up. We had nothing to do with this. Sarah and I just got the deed as a gift. We had no idea it was forged. The agent turned him. Interesting defense. It might have worked if you had not taken that fake deed to a bank 2 days ago to secure a $500,000 loan. Michael's jaw dropped. The reality hit him like a wrecking ball. The frozen accounts, the declined cards. It wasn't a glitch. It was a federal sting. You committed bank fraud, the agent said, signaling deputies. That is a separate crime. Your accounts are seized. Sarah let out a piercing scream. She collapsed to her knees, ruining her dress, sobbing as agents cuffed her husband. Michael didn't fight. He looked hollow, staring at the floor as his fake tech business vanished into thin air. Mom wept, mascara running down her face as they marched her out. Dad hung his head in shame, refusing to look at the friends he spent his life trying to impress. They were paraded past me. The flashing police lights caught their humiliated faces. I didn't flinch. I watched them load the people who betrayed me into vans. The party was over. The estate was mine again, and their reign of manipulation was finally finished. The lights faded in the cold Chicago night, leaving the house quiet. The guests had fled the moment they saw the handcuffs, treating the party like a sinking ship. Only Sarah remained. She was kneeling on the hardwood foyer, her silk gown stained with champagne and running makeup. She looked up, her face twisted in terror. Caroline, you can't do this, she sobbed, clutching the banister. Where am I supposed to go? Mom and Dad are arrested. This is my house. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. This isn't your home, Sarah. It never was. I tapped my screen and hit send. Within 60 seconds, a BRAC security van screeched in the driveway. 4 guards in tactical gear swarmed inside. I kept my team ready for this exact second. Clear the property, I ordered, my voice ice cold. She has 10 minutes for her things. Trash the rest. Sarah screamed as they marched past her. They grabbed her designer heels and makeup, tossing them on the cold pavement. You are a monster, she shrieked while being led away. You are ruining this family. I watched her stumble through the wind, shivering. She collapsed, buried under the fake life she built with my fortune. I slammed the heavy front doors and locked them for good. Finally, silence. The rot was gone. 6 months later, federal agents moved in, dismantling the crew that tried to bleed me dry. The bank voided the $500,000 loan once the FBI confirmed the fraud. They went further, filing a massive civil suit against Marcus, stacking onto his criminal charges. The fake tech founder was exposed as a total con man with zero revenue and amounts of debt. Facing bank records and a notary's confession, Marcus was denied bail. He is sitting in a holding cell now, awaiting trial for wire fraud. He faces years behind the bars, losing his prime decades. My parents fared no better. Arthur and Diane were indicted on multiple felonies. They tried to hire a top attorney, but without my secret backing, their funds evaporated. They drained their entire retirement just for legal fees. It didn't save them. The federal evidence was simply too heavy to fight. They are both serving time, stripped of their status and stolen wealth. Sarah filed for divorce the second Marcus was indicted, desperate to escape the wreckage. But it was too late. Without Marcus's fake income or my capital, she was left drowning in the massive credit card debt they used to fund their image. The luxury cars, the wedding, the status, it all collapsed at once. She is working a minimum wage job now, buried in collections and living in a tiny studio far from the neighborhood she once ruled. As for the estate, the court voided the forged deed in weeks. Ownership returned to me. I didn't keep the place. It held too many toxic memories. I listed it during a housing crunch. Because I kept the property in pristine condition, it sparked a brutal bidding war. I sold the house for $950,000 cash. I moved that profit in a safe bond portfolio, locking in my freedom. Standing on the deck of my Seattle lake house, winter slush was gone, everything felt bright and crisp. Sunlight danced off the water. The air tasted perfect. I sipped vintage champagne, savoring the taste of total victory. I haven't spoken to those vultures since I bolted the doors of that old place for good. I blocked their calls, tossed their desperate jailhouse letters, and scrubbed them from my life. I leaned on the railing, soaking up the sun. I protected my wealth, held my ground, and legally crushed the people trying to drain me. I am, finally, free, rich, and most of all, at peace. I toasted the mountains. Family isn't just blood. Family is people who don't betray your trust. The story of Sarah is a masterclass in setting boundaries. The truth is simple. Sharing blood doesn't mean people get to rob you blind. We are taught family is forever, no matter how toxic it gets. But Sarah shattered that lie. She proved blind loyalty is just a weapon for people who see you as a walking wallet. Her victory wasn't just winning a fraud lawsuit. It was reclaiming her soul. She showed that financial independence is the ultimate leverage. When you control your own money, you strip them of their power. Real strength isn't begging for apologies from people who feel nothing. It is about cold, calculated distance. You do not owe your peace to anyone plotting your downfall. Sometimes, self-love means backing away and letting them drown in their own mess. Never set yours on fire just to keep others warm. True family is built on respect, not greed. Walking away from toxic relatives is a massive win. If this story helped you set better boundaries, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below.